On November 17, 2012, a fisherman, along with a companion, set out from Costa Azul, Mexico, to fish in the Pacific Ocean. Their plan was to spend around 30 hours at sea and then return. Everything was going well. The day was clear, and Alvarenga had already caught around 500 kilograms of fish. But what happened next was completely unexpected. Suddenly, a storm hit, and waves started crashing upon them from all directions. With no place to hide, they decided to throw all the fish overboard and take shelter in the same box where they had stored the fish. The storm raged for the next 5 days, and they remained hidden inside that freezer box. When the storm finally subsided after 5 days, they emerged to find water stretching out in all directions as far as the eye could see. At that moment, they had no idea that they were about to be lost in the Pacific Ocean for 438 days. This is the story of Jose Alvarenga, and in this video, we will explore the heart-wrenching tale of his 438 days of fighting for survival in the middle of the ocean.
It's the kind of unbelievable story that's what the world is trying to figure out after a man.
Story of a man who says he's been lost at sea for over a year.
How many days were you out on that boat?
Tuve 438 días.
To start from the beginning, Jose Salvador Alvarenga was an expert fisherman and had been on many fishing trips in the ocean with his friend Ray Perez. He was supposed to go fishing with Ray on November 17th as well, but when the time came, Ray didn't show up, and instead, a man named Cordoba, whom Alvarenga didn't even know, arrived in his place. Despite this, the two men set off on a small 25-foot boat, which had no lights. Since they planned to spend only 30 hours at sea, they carried very limited supplies. As for what they took on the boat, they had a box to store the fish, 70 gallons of gasoline to run the boat, 16 gallons of water, a mobile phone, a GPS tracking device, a two-way radio, 91 kilograms of ice, 3 knives, a harpoon, 23 kilograms of bait, 700 hooks, and 3 buckets. As I mentioned earlier, they caught 500 kilograms of fish in the first few hours, but suddenly, the weather turned bad, and their boat started to rock. The waves rose so high that hundreds of gallons of water filled the boat. Alvarenga, being an experienced pilot, tried to steer the boat toward the coast, while Cordoba, being new, was frantically trying to bail water out of the boat. However, the water kept filling up faster, and at one point Cordoba started crying, thinking the boat would break apart, and that sharks would eat him. This was the first day of the storm, which had pushed them far into the ocean. After the first attack of the storm passed, the weather calmed down. When Alvarenga and Cordoba emerged from the box, the sky was clear again, and they spotted a mountain on the horizon. Realizing that land was nearby, Alvarenga quickly steered the boat toward it. But, as the saying goes, one problem doesn't go away before another comes. Just 2 hours away from land, the boat's engine failed. Their GPS was also broken, so they had no way of knowing their location. Fortunately, their two-way radio was still working, and they managed to contact their boss. Alvarenga, in a state of panic, told his boss, Willie, our boat is broken." Willie responded, "Calm down and give me your location." Alvarenga replied that the GPS was broken. Willie then told him to drop the anchor and stay put. Alvarenga responded, "We don't have an anchor." Willie tried to reassure him, saying, "Stay where you are. We're coming to get you." However, within an hour of this conversation, the battery of the two-way radio died, cutting off their last means of communication with the outside world. As they were contemplating what to do next, another wave of the storm hit, pushing their boat even further into the ocean. For the next 5 days, storms kept pushing them in unpredictable directions, farther and farther away from the coast. After 5 days, when the storm finally calmed down, they noticed that almost everything on the boat had been washed away by the waves, including the fishing hooks. Alvarenga's boss had launched a search operation for 2 days, but when they didn't find them, they assumed the men were dead and called off the search. Meanwhile, Alvarenga still held out hope that someone would come to rescue them. But as the days passed, they started getting hungry, and with no food left, Alvarenga began searching for a way to catch fish. Since they had no tools to fish with, Alvarenga started catching fish with his bare hands, which they ate raw. The sun was unbearably hot, and they got very thirsty. But since ocean water is salty, Alvarenga resorted to drinking his own urine and sometimes even drank turtle blood. This cycle kept repeating, but their bodies weren't getting enough hydration. After 14 days passed, one day while resting in the box, Alvarenga heard the sound of rain. When he went outside, he realized it was actually raining. They had a bucket, so they began storing the rainwater, and finally, after 14 days of drinking urine and turtle blood, they had fresh water to drink. But by this time, Cordoba's health had deteriorated. He had fallen ill from eating raw fish and birds and had stopped eating altogether. This made him so weak that he couldn't even drink water on his own. One day, the two made a promise to each other that if one of them survived, they would go to the other's family and tell them what had happened, saying, "I'm sorry, Mom, that I couldn't say goodbye." but I always loved you." Cordoba, weak and sick, eventually died. Alvarenga tried to wake him up, but Cordoba had passed away. Alvarenga kept his body on the boat, and after 6 days, he started talking to the corpse, having gone somewhat mentally disturbed. When he realized what he was doing, he carefully let Cordoba's body float away into the ocean. Alvarenga cried and screamed, "Why didn't I die first?" He now had no one left to talk to. He considered ending his life, but his will to survive kept him going. He kept looking out over the ocean, hoping to see a passing container ship. One day, a container ship passed by but didn't notice him. In fact, 20 ships passed by over time, but none of them noticed his small boat. Container ships are so large that a small boat is just like a piece of driftwood to them, and the crews rarely work on deck, making it nearly impossible to spot him. Alvarenga started to think he would die, but he tried to figure out how many months he had been lost at sea. He had no equipment, but he remembered how his grandfather had taught him to track time using the moon cycle. A full moon cycle takes about 29 days. Alvarenga counted 15 full moon cycles, realizing he had been lost at sea for 15 months. As he floated along with the waves, pondering death, suddenly a flock of birds appeared in the sky. Alvarenga grew excited because these were not seabirds. They were birds that lived near land. He spotted an island in the distance. For the first time in 15 months, he saw land. He quickly steered the boat toward it, but when he was just a short distance away, he jumped into the water, fearing that the waves might carry him away again. With all his remaining strength, he swam to the island. It was January 30th, 2014, and 438 days had passed. Alvarenga had become extremely thin and weak, and he still hadn't seen any other humans. But he was so overjoyed that he shouted out loud with happiness. He didn't know it, but he had landed on a tiny islet in the Pacific Ocean called Tile, about 8,800 kilometers from Mexico, where he had initially set off. These islands are so isolated from the outside world that the United States conducts nuclear bomb tests there. Tile Island is one of 23 small islets, collectively known as the Eben Atoll. Although Tile Island was uninhabited, there was a nearby island called Enenetok, where people lived. Luckily, on that day, a couple, Amy and Russell, who lived on Enenetok Island, heard Alvarenga's shouts. They went to Tile Island and became the first people Alvarenga had seen in 438 days. Overwhelmed with joy, Alvarenga tried to say something to them, but they couldn't understand him because he spoke Spanish, and they only spoke English. However, seeing his condition, they knew he was in serious trouble. They took him to their hut and gave him food, omelets and pancakes, which Alvarenga ate voraciously. The couple informed the police via telephone, and Alvarenga told his entire story to the authorities. When his boss confirmed that Alvarenga had been lost at sea on November 17, 2012, then this news spread all over the world, and Alvarenga, unfortunately or not, set a record for surviving the longest at sea, 438 days. After being rescued, in his interviews, Alvarenga said that it was his faith in God and his immense courage that allowed him to survive. An author named Jonathan Franklin wrote a book about his journey titled 438 Days. However, after the book's release, Cordoba's family filed a lawsuit against Alvarenga for $1 million, claiming that Alvarenga had eaten Cordoba's body to survive. But Alvarenga denied these accusations, saying, "No, I didn't eat him." What do you think? If Alvarenga had eaten Cordoba's body, would it have been right or wrong?